Welcome to another installment of Advancing the Common Good with United Way of the Lewis and Clark area. I'm Dana, and I'm the Director of Development and Marketing for United Way of the Lewis and Clark area. That is always such a mouthful. And we're really excited to be here today because it is the start of campaign season, which means that we are fundraising to advance health, education, financial stability, and meet basic needs throughout the Tri-County area. And today we thought it would be really cool to talk to you a little bit about what your generous support goes to do in our community and how the funding process works. So I am very fortunate today to be joined by Trina Filan, the Director of Community Impact at United Way, and also Nikki Anderson, who is the retired Executive Director for Exploration Works and also a really wonderful volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So right now there's a lot of talk about United Way's funding process and how it's kind of changed and what it's doing in the community. So Trina, can you tell me a little bit about how and why it's changed?
Sure. For a very long time, United Ways around the country and around the world were considered what is called a pass-through funding organization. So they would collect funding from workplaces and donors and then send it out to organizations that would do specifically designated work in the community, social services work, health and human services stuff. And that is how this United Way has operated for a very long time. About 20 years ago, United Way Worldwide decided that it would be a good idea to maybe focus in a more targeted way on addressing root causes of issues around 4 areas: basic needs, financial stability, education, and health, which are the cornerstones of health and human services organizations, really. And under those pillars, almost every United Way agency falls, right? Or especially here, all of our partner organizations fall within that framework. So about 3 years ago, United Way of the Lewis and Clark area decided that it was high time to start embracing this model so that it was clearer to donors how donations were targeted and at what problems they were targeted for solutions, right? How do we solve a problem instead of how do we just do the stuff we normally do?
Sure.
So we have been engaging for quite some time in community conversations with our partners, with community members, with board members, with a good array of folks. I'll admit that we could definitely have more community conversations around what our greatest challenges are and what our greatest opportunities are here in Helena and in the Tri-County area. And that is one of our goals in the next couple of years, is to continue those conversations and make sure we're still on the right track. But we've had a lot of input through visioning sessions and these conversations, and the community was involved in helping us create the 4 goals that we are targeting this year under each of those pillars. So there's a goal for each of those pillars.
Great. Mm-hmm. Good deal. So then I think it's just really interesting too, because we've got designated dollars. So if somebody wants to give through United Way, they can actually give to a specific organization or cause, or they can give to the Community Impact Fund. And every dollar given through designation is always going to go to the organization that the donor wants it to, no matter what. And then when it goes to Community Impact, that's where all of that funding is going to go out and target those root causes of issues in the community.
Right.
Right. So Nikki, as someone who has led a local nonprofit that partners with United Way, and also as somebody who's been through that whole funding process where you review all the applications for people who, or organizations that are looking to get some funding to do a specific project and target those root causes of issues in the community, how do you feel about the changes that were made, and how do you think they're going to impact our community?
I'm really, really excited about these new changes for United Way. I have been privileged to work with United Way agencies for about the last 20 years in 5 or 6 communities around the United States. And I was a little bit surprised when I moved to Helena and realized that our United Way was still using site visits to make as part of the decision-making process for grant funding, because over the last 20 years nationally, major funding organizations, foundations, and also donors have been asking for the organizations that they fund to demonstrate their impact. We continue to give you money. How do we know that the money that we're giving is actually changing what's happening in the community? So when United Way switched to a written grant application this year with scoring criteria for each of the questions that the agencies were asked to answer, and also had a space for the grant reviewers to write comments that justified their scores, suddenly there was a numeric scoring process in place, and there were 10 different individuals who scored the grants this year. And we can kind of divide the groups into the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third. And the top third were the organizations that just had absolute crackerjack grant applications, and most importantly, at least from my perspective, as someone who was reviewing the grants, the general statements that those applications made were supported by statistics, service statistics that said, here's the impact for the number of people we've served. It's not just, hey, we had a program and we offered it and we served this many people. Here's the changes that those services were making in people's lives. That's what donors are looking for as they consider whether they're going to continue to fund an organization. The challenge, I think, for the agencies was making this shift. And I have to, as an agency director, former agency director with United Way, I sat through a number of the training programs that United Way offered to the agencies to help us prepare for this change.
Sure.
And in my opinion, at least, those exactly what the agencies needed to know was made clear in those training sessions. Some of the United Way agencies were better able to specifically address those questions. So I think for the agencies that unfortunately this year were not funded, it's a continuing learning process and building their grant writing skills, but it also means that there are structural changes within those agencies because they need to start collecting the data that's going to show us as the broader Helena community how they're making a difference.
Sure.
And that goes directly back to what Trina was saying, in that we were trying to get at the root problems. Over time, we want to know that we've moved from here to there.
Sure.
In addressing those problems. And so I see this new process that United Way is adopting in putting the information on the table that both the agencies need and donors need to know that this community is moving forward.
Sure. And Trina, you and I talked a little bit earlier about all of this, and it was very interesting because we were talking about how just because an organization didn't necessarily get funding through the Community Impact Fund this year, it doesn't mean that they can't receive Community Impact dollars next year.
That's right.
Yeah, so they can continue to do that learning and growing and enhance their skills in grant writing, and then they can apply for funding next year.
Right. Yeah. The Community Impact Fund is a source, is the targeted funding source for this community change work, collaborative community change. And so if we have a good pot of community impact fund dollars, then we can direct more of those funding dollars to a collaborative, concerted effort by a group of organizations to address a problem. So we have the goal of making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We have some ways to measure whether that's happening, and folks who are interested in housing interventions could collectively apply for funding and show some outcomes. So we have those goals and measures under each of those pillars. That's what that community impact funding is for, and it will be for that purpose, right? Donor designated dollars will always go to the organization of choice for the donor. And for folks who feel like they want to move the needle on a particular issue, that's what the Community Impact Fund is for.
Sure. And I thought it was really interesting too, because this week we've done a lot of looking at kind of numbers and everything, and over $336,000 was designated last year in funding to specific organizations. It was designated by donors, which is great. I mean, I think it's great that we are offering the opportunity for donors to really connect with organizations they know and love. But what that does too, you know, on the flip side, it limits what's available in that community impact fund.
Yes.
So, and that makes, I feel like that would make the decision a little bit more difficult when you're scoring applications.
One of the things that I'm really proud of United Way, of Lewis and Clark area doing this year, is making the decision for those community impact funds rather than giving a little bit of money to all of the applicant organizations, which means that no organization had all of the money that they believed they needed to complete their project. And this year, as I understand it, United Way said, we have X amount of money, we're going to rank, well, the scores ranked each of the applications, and we will fully fund as many organizations as far as the money goes. I didn't say that very well, but you get,
Right.
you get,
Exactly.
you get the idea.
Exactly.
And I don't think that information has necessarily gotten out to the community.
Sure.
But I'm very, very proud that for the organizations that have been funded, they got the entire amount that they need to successfully complete the project. And I think
Sure.
that's huge.
And they got it in a lump sum instead
Yes.
of parsed out over 12 months. So they could actually do a project that was a designated summer project in the summer, right?
Right.
Instead of waiting for a full year to have the funding available. So it's definitely a change, but again, the more we have in that pot, the more we can fund to accomplish certain goals
Absolutely, absolutely.
that the community has designated, right? The community was involved
Right.
in creating those goals, so let's drive some change toward them.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's really very telling. I think that the community was actually so involved in this whole process that they helped to build all the criteria that the funding was, the applications were scored on, and they had a real say in that. And I think it's also very telling that those community volunteers made recommendations on funding and submitted them to our board of directors, who reviewed everything and then went ahead and decided to approve.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
It's a well-vetted process, and a lot of people with expertise in grant writing and grant making were involved in the recreation of that application, in the assessment of the application, and so I think that lent a lot of strength to the process because it was being viewed through the eyes of a specialty, right? Grant
Sure.
making and grant writing. However, that does not mean that people who are used to volunteering with the citizen review process are cut out of the process. One of the great features we have this year is that volunteers who didn't participate in the grant making part are going to be invited to go and view a project in process. So that's one of the volunteer opportunities coming up. If anyone's interested in going to a designated project, seeing what's going on, let us know.
Great. Well, I hate to do this, but we are out of time.
Sure.
So, but I really appreciate both of your time and lending us a little bit of a insight from your perspective. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the chance.
And if anybody has any questions about any of the projects that were funded through this last grant cycle, please do visit us at unitedwaylca.org. Thanks.